On board the flagship of the Vroken Empire, Admiral Jorkath stood at the observation deck, staring out at Earth. The blue planet below teemed with life, a species so fragile yet seemingly brimming with potential. The Admiral had observed many worlds over his long career, and none had quite intrigued him like this one. For months, his fleet had watched from afar, studying the humans with clinical detachment, assessing their technology, culture, and military capabilities. The Vroken Empire had little interest in conquest. For conquest's sake, their aim was to expand their knowledge of the galaxy by understanding the species that inhabited it. But there was something about humanity that gnawed at Jorkath's mind. Their ability to innovate and adapt quickly was unlike any other species the Empire had encountered. The humans were small, weak, and their technology primitive in comparison to the Vroken Empire, yet their potential was undeniable. One day, during a routine visit to the diplomatic wing of the flagship, Jorkath observed something unusual. A group of human delegates arrived carrying with them an advanced piece of technology, a Starship simulator. This wasn't just a training tool for young cadets. This was something more, a complex device capable of simulating entire space battles. It piqued the Admiral's curiosity immediately. The Vroken Empire had developed similar technology, but the human version seemed far simpler, and yet the humans spoke of it with great pride. They claimed it was used to teach their children strategy and tactics in the comfort of their homes, a game for entertainment. But Jorkath had learned long ago that no technology was without purpose, and no tool was without value. He ordered the simulator to be connected to the flagship systems and monitored closely. The human children were the first to engage with the simulator. Their laughter and playful chatter filled the air. As they gathered around the machine, it was clear that they treated it like a game, not something to be taken seriously, at least not in the way the Vroken Empire took things seriously. And yet something about their approach struck Jorkath as strange. One child in particular stood out to him, a young girl no older than 10 who seemed to approach the simulator with a focus and intensity that belied her age. She stepped up to the controls with confidence, sitting down and placing her hands on the interface. The Admiral observed her from a distance, his mind skeptical of the child's capabilities. After all, how could a mere human child compete with the high-level officers and generals of the Vroken military? As the simulation began, the child's movements were slow, at first tentative, almost as if she was testing the waters of the virtual universe. But as the battle unfolded, the Admiral's skepticism quickly turned to confusion. The child's tactics were far more advanced than anything Jorkath had expected. She guided her fleet of digital starships with uncanny precision, using clever maneuvers and evasive actions that left the virtual enemy fleet scrambling to respond. She didn't rely on brute force or firepower. Instead, she focused on positioning and outwitting the simulation's AI. The Admiral watched in silence, his eyes narrowing as he tried to understand what he was witnessing. This was no ordinary game. This was something more, and he had a sinking feeling that this child might be the key to unlocking humanity's potential in ways the Vroken Empire had never imagined. Jorkath's eyes remained fixed on the young human as she deftly commanded her digital fleet. The child's focus was intense, her small hands moving quickly across the controls as the starships under her command darted through the simulated battlefield with fluid precision. Jorkath's initial impression that this was just a child playing a game began to crack and shatter before his eyes. He had assumed that this simulation was a form of simple entertainment, something designed to amuse children. But what he was witnessing now was far from a game. This child wasn't just interacting with the simulation, she was mastering it. The virtual enemy forces didn't stand a chance against her methods, and Jorkath found himself leaning closer to the display, his mind racing with questions. The child didn't act the way a typical human would in a military simulation. She wasn't concerned with overwhelming force or sheer numbers. Instead, she thought 3 steps ahead, using diversionary tactics to pull the virtual enemy fleet into a vulnerable position before striking with precision. The Admiral's vast experience with warfare had taught him to respect well-planned strategy, but what this human child demonstrated wasn't mere strategy. It was instinctual, something raw and unrefined, yet undeniably brilliant. As the simulation progressed, Jorkath felt a creeping unease building in the pit of his stomach. The child's tactical brilliance was undeniable, and yet it was coming from the most unexpected of sources, a child from a primitive world. The Admiral glanced at the monitor tracking the performance of the simulation as the child's fleet tore through waves of enemies that outnumbered and outgunned her ships. Each maneuver was a calculated risk, yet somehow she made it work. The Admiral had seen simulations like this before, used by military strategists and officers in the Vroken Empire, but never had he seen such a flawless execution from such a young mind. The human child was using a type of warfare Jorkath hadn't seen in decades, a combination of deception and skillful positioning that bordered on artistry. The Vroken Empire had long prided itself on its technological superiority and military dominance, but the child's gameplay revealed a depth of tactical thinking that technology alone couldn't explain. The Admiral's focus deepened, and for the first time in his long career, he felt a sense of vulnerability creeping in. He had underestimated humanity. No longer were they a simple species struggling for survival. They were capable of much more. They had something other species didn't possess: the ability to innovate on the fly, to outthink an opponent, and find solutions in the most dire of situations. This wasn't something that could be taught with technology or advanced weaponry. It was inherent within them, a trait that made them dangerous in ways the Empire had not prepared for. Jorkath's mind raced as the child's fleet emerged victorious from the simulation, the digital starships floating triumphantly in the virtual space. The Admiral knew that no matter how advanced their technology was, the Vroken Empire could not simply rely on force to dominate the galaxy. There was something far more profound at work here, something that humanity possessed in abundance, and the Admiral could no longer ignore it. As the child stood up from the simulator with a grin on her face, Jorkath felt a sense of awe and dread in equal measure. He had to know more about this species and about the child who had unlocked a hidden potential that no one had anticipated. Jorkath couldn't shake the image of the human child's smile as she walked away from the simulator. The casualness of it unsettled him, as if she had just completed a simple task rather than outwitting a virtual fleet designed to challenge the most seasoned commanders in the galaxy. He had watched countless simulations over the years, but none had left him with such a sense of awe and wariness as this one. There was something about the child's calm confidence that made him wonder if he had underestimated humanity in a way that could have dire consequences for the Vroken Empire. After the simulation ended, the Admiral ordered an immediate debrief with his top officers. He needed to understand what had just happened. He needed to find out how a young human child could have performed so flawlessly in a complex simulation that was designed to push the best and brightest to their limits. Jorkath gathered his fleet's most experienced tacticians and analysts and instructed them to review the footage of the child's performance. The group was silent as they watched the replay over and over, each time noticing something new. The child had taken risks that any other strategist would have deemed foolish, yet each gamble paid off with stunning precision. What was even more perplexing was the child's ability to anticipate the behavior of the AI. She seemed to predict the actions of the virtual enemy forces with an almost unnatural certainty. It wasn't merely pattern recognition. It was as if she could feel the rhythm of the simulation itself. As the officers discussed the simulation in hushed tones, Jorkath grew more convinced that this wasn't an isolated incident. There was something fundamentally different about the way humans approached problem-solving, something that set them apart from every other species he had encountered in the galaxy. They didn't rely on brute strength or sheer technological superiority. Like the Vroken Empire, they didn't have the same advanced weaponry or spacefaring abilities as other civilizations, but they had something else, something that made them dangerous and unpredictable. The Admiral ordered further testing of the simulator. He wanted to see if the child's performance was a fluke, or if there was a deeper pattern emerging. More human children were brought in to engage with the simulator. Each of them approached it with the same natural instinct and innovation that the first child had displayed. Though their tactics differed slightly, each one demonstrated the same underlying brilliance. It was as if there was an innate ability to think outside the box, to improvise and adapt in ways no other species could replicate. Jorkath's mind raced as he watched the simulations unfold. The human children weren't merely playing a game, they were shaping the future of warfare. In real time, they were testing boundaries and discovering new possibilities in ways that the Vroken Empire had never considered in all their years of strategic dominance. The Admiral had assumed that superior technology would always win the day, but the humans were proving him wrong with every new simulation they completed. It wasn't the technology that made them formidable, it was their minds, their ability to think differently and challenge the status quo. One child after another emerged victorious from the simulator, each performance more impressive than the last. It became clear to Jorkath that this wasn't a fluke or a simple game. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Humanity was far more advanced than he had given them credit for. Their true strength lay not in their machines, but in their minds, and the Admiral found himself realizing that the Vroken Empire's greatest challenge might not come from an advanced alien force or a powerful weapon. It might come from something as simple as a child playing a game. As the days passed, Jorkath could no longer ignore the overwhelming evidence of humanity's capabilities. He spent hours watching the replays of the simulations, unable to tear his eyes away from the brilliance unfolding before him. Every human child who approached the simulator seemed to possess the same innate ability to think beyond the usual bounds of military tactics. Each time they faced the virtual enemy fleet, they used the simplest tools at their disposal with startling innovation. The children's actions weren't born of experience, but from something deeper, an almost instinctual grasp of combat strategy that defied explanation. It was as if they were born with an unspoken understanding of how to outthink and outmaneuver opponents. Jorkath couldn't help but wonder, how was it possible? Was this something unique to humans? It didn't seem like training or intelligence alone could account for the precision and creativity he was witnessing. He had seen advanced civilizations, highly evolved and technologically superior, but never had he seen such an unpredictable, raw ingenuity. What was it about humanity that made them capable of this? He spent more time with the simulator, delving into the deeper layers of the child's decisions. The strategies they employed were bizarre yet effective. They would often sacrifice a part of the fleet to create a distraction, leading the enemy to believe they had made a mistake, only to trap them in a devastating counterattack. The Vroken Empire simulations had been designed to test the limits of high-level commanders. But these humans, these children, were redefining the boundaries of what could be accomplished in battle. The Admiral could see no pattern in their tactics that could be easily replicated or countered. The simulations responded to each child's actions with the predictable rules of warfare, yet the humans bent those rules to their will. He couldn't help but be captivated by the paradox of it all. These beings from a primitive world, still struggling with basic technology, were effortlessly crafting complex strategies that rivaled some of the most refined war doctrines in the galaxy. The Admiral, who had seen countless civilizations rise and fall, now felt a stirring of doubt. Was his species truly the pinnacle of evolution, or was there something about humanity that the Vroken Empire simply couldn't grasp? In a rare moment of contemplation, Jorkath left his command center and visited the simulator chamber, the room where the children had been playing. There, he found a group of young humans gathered, awaiting their turn. They spoke among themselves, laughing and joking, as though they had no idea they were on the verge of something world-altering. The Admiral watched them quietly, unable to shake the growing sense of respect that he felt for these children. They didn't see the simulator as a tool of war, but as a way to explore their own capabilities. It was only when one of the children noticed his presence and stared up at him with wide, curious eyes that Jorkath realized how far humanity had come. They didn't fear him. They didn't even know what he was truly capable of. For a moment, the Admiral felt small, almost insignificant. This was a species that didn't need to dominate to succeed. They didn't require advanced technology or overwhelming force. They were growing and evolving in ways no one had expected, and they were doing it on their own terms. Jorkath stood still, watching the children play, and for the first time in his life, he felt the weight of a new understanding. Humanity wasn't a species to be overlooked. They were a species to be watched, studied, and perhaps even respected. The more Jorkath observed, the more he found himself tangled in a web of fascination and unease. It wasn't just the brilliance of the children's tactics that caught his attention. It was the underlying force that drove them. These were not simple games to them. They were tests, challenges, battles of the mind. And they approached them with an unrelenting curiosity, a thirst for mastery that seemed as natural as breathing. To Jorkath, it was as if humanity wasn't just playing. They were evolving in real time, adapting their strategies and learning from each failure and victory. There was something organic, almost alive in their approach to warfare. They didn't just follow patterns. They created them. Jorkath began to expand his studies of the human mind. He ordered his researchers to examine the psychological aspects of humanity, seeking to understand the nature of this drive that seemed to manifest in every young child. The results were as baffling as they were unsettling. The human mind, it seemed, was designed for innovation. Their brains were wired not just to respond to problems, but to actively seek out new solutions, to think outside the bounds of convention. They were a species constantly in flux, ever-changing, constantly testing new ideas and finding new ways to solve problems, sometimes in ways that seemed reckless, but often in ways that made sense only after the fact. And what was most alarming to Jorkath was the fact that these children weren't just playing. They were learning. They weren't simply reacting to the simulation. They were pushing it to its limits, stretching the very idea of what was possible. One child, a boy no older than 8, had figured out how to manipulate the virtual enemy's eye in a way no one had anticipated. Instead of engaging them directly, he used their programming against them, tricking them into thinking they were pursuing him when in fact, he was setting them up for a trap. The boy's strategy was unorthodox, almost too daring, but it worked. Jorkath found himself staring at the display in disbelief. There was no manual for this. There was no teaching the child to think this way. It was something innate, something deep inside them. The more simulations he watched, the more Jorkath began to recognize a pattern. It wasn't about intelligence. It wasn't about training. It was about humanity's ability to think beyond the obvious, to see possibilities where others saw none. Where the Vroken Empire relied on cold, calculated efficiency, humanity relied on ingenuity and a kind of reckless brilliance. Their mindsets were not shaped by generations of tradition or an over-reliance on technology. Instead, they embraced chaos, uncertainty, and unpredictability. They were wild in a way that no other species was, and yet it was this very wildness that made them so formidable. The Admiral found himself reflecting on his own species' history. The Vroken Empire had once been small, isolated, and technologically backward. But they had grown, evolved, and expanded through sheer willpower and ruthless discipline. It had worked for them, but now, as he watched the human children play, he began to wonder if their path might have been too narrow, too rigid. Could it be that humanity, with its wild creativity and unbounded curiosity, was on the cusp of something that would allow them to rise faster, adapt more fully, and perhaps even surpass the very empires that had once thought themselves invincible? Jorkath's mind spun with the implications. The human species was evolving at an unprecedented rate, and the galaxy had underestimated them for too long. He had thought the Vroken Empire's advanced weapons and technology were enough to secure their dominance, but the humans were showing him a new truth. The future of the galaxy might not lie in the hands of empires or weapons. It might lie in the minds of children like the ones he watched now. And as he stared at their innocent faces, full of potential and unknowingly shaping the future of the galaxy, Jorkath realized with growing certainty that humanity would no longer be a species to overlook. They would soon be a force to reckon with. As the days went on, Jorkath found himself increasingly drawn into the mystery of humanity's potential. He had expected to find a simple, primitive species with no real strategic depth, a race that could be easily manipulated or ignored. Instead, he was faced with something far more complex, something that defied the logic and certainty of broken thinking. It wasn't just the brilliance of the children in the simulations, it was their very nature. Every child, regardless of background or upbringing, seemed to possess this innate drive to innovate, adapt, and overcome. It was as if they were born with a deep, unshakable need to solve problems, to create new paths where none had existed before. In an attempt to understand more, Jorkath ordered that additional simulations be conducted, but this time, he would not merely observe the children's tactics. He would delve deeper into the psychology of their behavior. It was clear to him now that the human mind was not just capable of creative thought. It thrived on it. Every child who engaged with the simulator seemed to be not just testing their skills, but their very understanding of the world around them. They didn't just learn by experience. They learned by breaking down the rules and then reshaping them into something new. The more the Admiral observed, the more he became convinced that it wasn't just the strategic brilliance of the children that was revolutionary. It was the way their minds worked. Jorkath arranged to meet with one of the leading human psychologists aboard the flagship, Dr. Elena Wren, a specialist in cognitive development. He had learned that she was one of the primary researchers studying human behavior in relation to their increasing proficiency with advanced technologies. He hoped that she could shed some light on what was happening within the human mind, why their children were capable of such extraordinary feats of tactical brilliance. When Jorkath entered her lab, he was greeted by a soft-spoken woman with sharp, calculating eyes. She stood beside a large screen, monitoring several children as they played with the simulator. The children's faces were lit with excitement as they executed maneuvers Jorkath had never seen before, moves that disrupted the very laws of the game. It was a level of play that went beyond strategy. It was as if they were rewriting the rules themselves. "Dr. Wren," Jorkath began, his voice cautious. "I need to understand what I'm witnessing. How are they doing this? How are they, these children, able to think in ways that defy everything we know about warfare and tactics?" Dr. Wren paused, taking a moment to analyze the question. She looked at the screen and then back at Jorkath, her expression thoughtful. "What you're seeing is a phenomenon that's deeply ingrained in human nature," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Human children have an extraordinary capacity to adapt. They're not bound by tradition, and they're not afraid of failure. They approach problems without the limitations that older generations, like yours, might carry. They're more willing to take risks, to experiment, to break things and rebuild them in new ways. And they do all of this with an astonishing level of creativity and resourcefulness." Jorkath listened intently, trying to absorb the magnitude of her words. He had been focused solely on the strategic outcomes, but Dr. Wren was telling him that the key to humanity's brilliance lay not just in their ability to execute plans, but in their ability to reinvent the very nature of the problem they were solving. They didn't just adapt. They reshaped the way challenges were perceived. It was no longer about responding to a preordained set of rules. It was about rewriting those rules entirely. "It's not just intelligence," Dr. Wren continued. "It's about flexibility. Their brains are wired to see connections that others don't. They don't look at problems as fixed. They look at them as puzzles waiting to be solved. It's why they can think so far outside the box." Jorkath's mind raced. This explained everything. The humans weren't just playing a game. They were testing their very perceptions of reality, of conflict, of survival. They weren't restricted by the established frameworks that bound most other species. Instead, they created their own. And that made them unpredictable, dangerous. As he left Dr. Wren's lab, a chilling realization settled over him. Humanity's greatest strength lay not in their technology, not in their fleet strength or military prowess. It lay in their minds. They were capable of disrupting entire systems, breaking through established patterns, and constructing new ways of thinking in a way that no other species in the galaxy had. The Vroken Empire had long prided itself on its calculated approach, its cold, methodical thinking, but now Jorkath saw that, in this galaxy of constant change, that very methodical nature could become a weakness. If humanity was allowed to evolve unimpeded, They could, within a generation, become a force capable of challenging even the mightiest empires. Jorkath's mission had shifted. He was no longer just an observer of a primitive species. He was now a cautious watcher of a rising power, one that would soon demand the galaxy's attention. And the Admiral knew, deep down, that his empire's future might soon depend on how they chose to deal with this unexpected and rapidly growing threat. Jorkath spent the following weeks in a state of uneasy reflection, revisiting his past assumptions about humanity. The more he observed, the clearer it became that Earth and its inhabitants were not simply a footnote in the galaxy's grand history. They were a challenge, a puzzle, one that his empire had failed to see until it was almost too late. The way humanity thought, unconstrained, inventive, and relentless, had the potential to reshape the balance of power in the universe. It was no longer just a matter of military might or advanced technology. Humanity's strength lay in their boundless adaptability, and that alone made them a formidable force. The Vrokan Empire had long prided itself on its ability to control and predict outcomes. They had seen countless species come and go, their advances swiftly contained by superior strategy, overwhelming firepower, or simple subjugation. But humanity was different. They weren't following the predictable patterns of development that the Empire had grown accustomed to. Humans didn't need to dominate in the traditional sense to succeed. They were capable of thriving in the chaos, disrupting systems, and rewriting the rules as they saw fit. And the most troubling part was that they didn't even realize they were doing it. For them, it was instinctual, natural, like breathing. One evening, as Jorkath lingered in the observation deck, watching the stars stretch across the vast emptiness of space, he began to understand the full scope of what the humans might represent. The child he had watched months earlier wasn't an anomaly. No, she was a glimpse into the future of humanity. If every human child possessed even a fraction of the adaptability and creative brilliance displayed in the simulations, then the future of the galaxy was one of profound uncertainty. It was a future where the Vrokan Empire's methods, honed over centuries, might no longer hold sway. In his growing anxiety, Jorkath convened another private council. He brought together his most trusted strategists and analysts, hoping to finally make sense of the implications. The human threat wasn't one of strength, but of evolution, of a species capable of pushing boundaries in ways that the Vrokan Empire hadn't anticipated. The council room buzzed with discussions about how the Vrokan Empire could respond. Some argued for a direct military intervention, an immediate strike to suppress humanity before they could become too powerful. But Jorkath knew better. Force would not solve this. The humans weren't like other species. No direct confrontation would quench the fire of their creativity. We cannot fight them in the same way we have fought others, Jorkath said firmly, standing at the head of the table. Their strength is not in their weapons or their fleets. It's in their minds, their ability to adapt and innovate. If we try to meet them with brute force, we will lose. We must rethink how we engage with them. We need to understand them fully. One of his senior officers, a tactical expert named Karak, spoke up with a skeptical tone. But what are we to do? The longer we wait, the stronger they become. They are already producing innovative technologies at a rapid rate, and their children, those who are the future, are outwitting us on every front. If we delay too long, the galaxy will shift beneath our feet. Jorkath's gaze hardened. I know. And that is why we must be cautious. We must learn everything we can about their culture, their ways of thinking, their systems. If we underestimate them now, we will make the same mistake we made with their military potential. We will be blindsided. The room fell silent as his words hung in the air. For the first time, Jorkath realized that the true threat of humanity wasn't just their children, their intellect, it was their unpredictability. Their unwillingness to conform to the expectations of galactic powers. Like the Vrokan Empire was both their greatest strength and their greatest danger. As the meeting concluded, Jorkath remained seated, his mind racing. He had made the decision. The Empire would need to shift its focus. Instead of focusing on direct confrontation, it was time to learn, to adapt, and perhaps even to join humanity's journey of exploration and evolution. There was no other way. If the Vroken Empire was to survive in this new era, it would have to become something it had never been before, flexible, innovative, and willing to evolve alongside this unpredictable species. And deep within him, Jorkath knew that this would be the most difficult and dangerous challenge he had ever faced. Not defeating humanity, but learning to live in a galaxy where they were no longer the underdogs. Months passed, and Jorkath's resolve was tested like never before. The Vroken Empire, once proud and unyielding, was now in the throes of transformation. His mission had shifted from mere observation to active engagement with the human species, and this new path was far from straightforward. Jorkath had ordered his fleet to minimize its presence in human space, to refrain from aggressive actions, and to start gathering data, not just on humanity's technological developments, but on their cultural evolution, their mindsets, their behaviors. He was no longer interested in simply knowing how they fought. He needed to understand the very essence of what made them different, to discern the root of their adaptability and ingenuity. As the Vroken fleet began to operate more covertly within human territory, Jorkath arranged for regular interactions with Earth's leaders. He was no longer the proud conqueror. Now, he was a diplomat, one who had come to learn from those he once considered inferior. The meetings were often tense. Humanity was not a naive species, and the Vroken Empire's reputation for domination and subjugation wasn't easily forgotten. Still, as Jorkath spoke with the human leaders, something remarkable began to unfold. They weren't just trying to preserve their independence, they were eager to share their knowledge, to find common ground. Humanity was not just open to cooperation, they were actively seeking it. They wanted to understand the universe, and had no intention of being left behind. It was during one of these high-level talks with President Elizabeth Ward, the leader of Earth, that Jorkath began to realize how far humanity had already come. They had not just survived in the galactic landscape. They had thrived. Despite their primitive technology, they had developed their own approach to interstellar exploration. They had built alliances with other species, brokered peace deals, and set ambitious goals for their future, goals that would put even the most established empires to shame. "I'm not sure what you expect to find here, Admiral," President Ward said, her voice steady, but carrying a note of challenge. "Humanity is still growing, still learning. We haven't achieved everything we're capable of yet, but we are not the same species you encountered all those years ago. We are changing. And if you've come to learn, to understand that change, you're welcome to stay. But we will not be controlled." Jorkath took a deep breath, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had expected defiance, resistance, but what he didn't expect was a sense of shared purpose, a realization that their fates were linked in a way that neither species had anticipated. The fear that had once fueled his desire to suppress humanity was slowly being replaced by a sense of awe. They were not a threat to be eradicated, but a force to be reckoned with. "I came here to learn," Jorkath said finally, his voice calm but resolute. "To understand how your species adapts so quickly, how you think, how you evolve. I believe we could help each other. But more than that, I believe we could learn from one another." The conversation that followed was unlike any Jorkath had ever had. It was not an exchange of threats or demands, but of ideas, visions, and mutual respect. The human leaders spoke of their aspirations for peace, for collaboration, and their desire to learn from other species without losing their identity. They spoke of their children, of the incredible potential they saw in the next generations. And Jorkath found himself listening, truly listening, in a way he never had before. As the talks ended and Jorkath returned to his ship, he reflected on everything he had witnessed. The simulation games, the children's strategies, the meetings with Earth's leaders. These were the signs of a species on the verge of something extraordinary. The Vroken Empire had always believed it was the pinnacle of evolution, but humanity was something new, something different. They were not bound by the past. They didn't operate within the limits of tradition and protocol. They were free to imagine, to create, and to break the rules in ways that made them a unique and powerful force in the galaxy. Jorkath knew that the future of the Vroken Empire could no longer be secured by force alone. If they were to survive in the galaxy's changing landscape, they would have to evolve alongside humanity. Embrace their creativity, their unpredictability, and their relentless drive to adapt. The Vroken Empire's greatest challenge was not humanity's weapons, their fleets, or their armies. It was humanity itself, their ability to think, to innovate, and to redefine what it meant to survive. And as Jorkath looked out at the stars from his ship's observation deck, he realized that the galaxy was no longer a place of domination. It was a place of endless possibility and humanity. Those bold, unpredictable, ever-adaptive beings would be at the center of it.